Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. In 2002, my family and I took a trip to Taiwan, and I was scared to death. You got to remember what had happened the previous year, and I didn't want to fly. But we had some important family matters, and long story short, I was a huge emotional wreck the whole trip to Taiwan. I caused a lot of trouble, and my mom added a lot of grief to the trip as well because she complained about my unhealthy choices of food. I used to be a soda-holic, and one day she had purchased a 1 liter of soda and told me that it's really expensive here in Taiwan and don't drink it all in one go. And I drank it within a few hours, and she was really upset. I don't think it was the money she was upset about. She was upset that I was unwilling to try other things in Taiwan. In my mind, I had just put up with a very terrifying 14-hour flight to get there. I wasn't really in the mood to try new things, right? And A week into the trip, one day we were at my grandmother's apartment when we learned about another plane crash in Taiwan. China Airlines 611, in case you're curious. At the time, we didn't know what caused it. We thought it could have been another case of terrorism. And so I was really scared to death. I almost didn't want to go home after that. And so on the way home, my mom reminded me that in my lifetime, I have to fly at least 3 more times. At the time, 3 of my grandparents were alive, and she was implying that I had to go to their funerals. And I was scared to death. I told my parents, one day we're going to have a bridge over the Bering Strait. I was learning to drive at the time. I thought, I'll just drive to China and take a boat into Taiwan. And my dad said, "Are you crazy? You're not even going to survive one trip if you do that." And in the last 20 some years of driving, I've had numerous car accidents, and he was right about that. And I said, well, maybe one day we'll have faster flights to Taiwan. If it takes 15 minutes to fly to Taiwan, maybe it'll just be like a scary theme park ride. I'll put up with it. It'll be done with. I'll be in Taiwan. After all, theme park rides can be about as safe as flying, right? They're both relatively safe, but they're fast, right? It's over before you can be scared about it, right? And so my dad said, "You know what? That's possible," and he left it at that. Well, unfortunately, a year and a half later, Space Shuttle Columbia crashed, and I got scared to death about flying. And it turns out I didn't fly for another 6 years after that. Fast forward to 2009. I was working on my PhD. I was going to school in Rochester, New York. I had a conference in Louisville, Kentucky. I was talking to my advisor about it. She says, "Go book a flight." And I'm like, you know what? I think I'll drive there. It's about a 14-hour drive. And my PhD advisor was so upset about that. And I told her that I hadn't flown since just after 9/11, and I don't intend to ever fly again. And my PhD advisor was telling me, well, what about all these conferences? What if your paper gets accepted here or there? All these other fun places. Don't you want to travel? And also, my PhD advisor knew my family's from Taiwan. And so she was like, do you never want to see your family again? And I told her, I'll have to think hard about that, but it's just not in the cards now. I drove there. Long story short, I ran into a lot of drama. I got multiple flat tires and all sorts of other crap along the way. My advisor was so upset. I was late getting back to campus. The following year, I had another conference, this time in Rome. I submitted the paper, but I was hoping it wouldn't get accepted. I, I half-assed the paper because I really didn't want it to get accepted. The review came back, and you know how when you submit something and it gets rejected, let's say you go apply for your dream job and you don't get it, and you don't necessarily get an email that has a big no on it, right? They circle the drain, right? So when the response came back, I was looking for the rejection. I couldn't believe my eyes. My paper got accepted. And I was thinking about how I'm going to I wanted to tell my advisor that I had some kind of emergency, couldn't go, something like that. But I remembered how upset my advisor had already been. The next thing I did, I was using a dating app at the time. At the time you could just type in whatever location you wanted. Right nowadays you need a VPN, and I decided to see what kind of people I could meet in Rome. And when I did that, I was like, this is too good an opportunity to pass up. I want to go there just to use the dating app, and so I bit the bullet and I flew to Rome. And what was really funny was halfway through the flight, I forgot I was even nervous about the flight. Well, long story short, unfortunately two of the three flights that were my obligation to take have already passed. I got one more to go. Actually, I don't know if I have one more to go because someday we may find the solution to live forever, right? But at most, one more to go. And you know what's really funny? I still don't necessarily 100% like flying. I don't fear it for the terrorism or the accidents anymore, but the logistics of it, having to plan vacation time away from work. Let's face it, I usually am working a job that I love, right? And then when I get there, I struggle with eating disorders. Depending on where I go, if the food is unfamiliar, it could set me off in a bad way. I was just researching potentially spending some time with a friend in Vietnam, but when I looked at restaurant menus and grocery stores, I was like, oh, this isn't going to go too well with my eating disordered ways, right? The setup of things, hotel, you don't have as many hostels where you can cook your own food like you did in Taiwan, right? And then I was thinking about visiting Helene Curry. It doesn't look like she spends a lot. If I were to travel to Poland, it might not be so bad. I'm used to how to look for food there. Food is very inexpensive there. I could basically eat whatever I want without regard to cost, right? I can't say the same thing about France, and having restrictions like that really set off eating disorder kind of ways, right? The same applies to. I'm just about to start a dream job, but I look. The job is a dream job. The circumstances are not, right? I'm going to be working at a tutoring center. The hours are wonky. Can't really plan for an 18-hour fast whenever I want to. And I know it sounds really weird, but things like that really bug me. It just goes to show that when you see somebody working a dream job, they're doing a lot more than what they're doing, right? So, for example, I was thinking about 5 years ago, I was really fascinated with space travel. I was thinking about doing some astronaut training, but then I realized that would really, really mess with my eating disorders, right? I love the idea of going to space, and I probably know all the science behind it, but how it interacts with my eating disorder, how it interacts with my socialization is a completely different story, right? This is the Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum.